as a mom, especially if you got a bunch of little kids and you're trying to like organize a whole home education paradigm for them and just all the work and order and organizing that's involved in that, I think you got to remember that you are a spiritual being and you're not just a workhorse. And so you need to carve out time for your own intellectual delight and growth and enjoyment.
Welcome to Scholé Sisters, the podcast for classical homeschooling mamas who yearn for something more than just checking boxes and getting it all done. Scholé Sisters discusses topics that matter to those of us who believe that educating ourselves through reading widely, thinking deeply, and applying faithfully equips us for the task of educating our children. I'm your host, Brandy Venzel. You can come study Charlotte Mason with me over in the Charlotte Mason Think Tank. Go to afterthoughtsblog.net/think tank to learn more. My co-host today is Abby Wall. Abby is basically the queen of the Scholé Sistership. Abby is a country-living farmer, rancher, a loving wife, and mom of 5 who homeschools and reads whenever she can. Our special guest today is Jason Barney from the Educational Renaissance podcast. Jason serves as the principal of Coram Deo Academy in Indiana. In 2012, he was awarded the Henry Salvatori Prize for Excellence in Teaching from Hillsdale College. He completed his MA in Biblical Exegesis at Wheaton College, where he received the Tenney Award in New Testament Studies. In addition to his administrative responsibilities in vision, philosophy, and faculty training, Jason has taught courses in Latin, humanities, and senior thesis from 3rd to 12th grades. He has published several books, including A Classical Guide to Narration with the Circe Institute and A Short History of Narration with Educational Renaissance. He regularly speaks at events and conferences, including SCL, ACCS, and the Circe Institute, and has 2 courses on Classical U on Charlotte Mason and narration. In addition, he has provided training for schools like the Geneva School, the Covenant School of Dallas, and the Ecclesial Schools Initiative. Jason blogs regularly on ancient wisdom for the modern era at educationalrenaissance.com. Have you joined the Scholé Sistership yet? In January, we kicked off our annual 5x5 reading challenge. It's not too late to join us. All you have to do is head on over to scholésisters.com/join and sign up for the Sophie plan. And in addition to a replay of our big kickoff webinar from January, you'll get tons of accountability, book ideas, and support. That's scholésisters.com/join. Jason Barney has written a lot over the years about the use of rewards and their effects on children. Abby and I thoroughly enjoyed discussing rewards and intrinsic motivation with him, and we think you'll love what he had to say. And so, without further ado, let's get to it. Let's start off with our Scholé Everyday. Abby, we'll have you go first and show us how it goes.
That's right. Okay. So one of our things that we're working on in Sistership is tectonic. And so I wanted to kind of round out that category. And so one of the books that I found is called Outdoor Kids in an Inside World. So since we've been talking about screen time and kind of the philosophy behind that, I wanted to have some other sources to kind of help me round out and flesh out some of the like actual outdoor activities that we do. So my family is big hunting and outdoorsy and on a farm and everything like that, but it's not like I can't learn something. And so this one looked great, and it's by Steve Rinella, which he actually hosts a show on TV.
Really?
Called Meat Eater. And my kids actually have watched it, and my husband, and he's great because he is pro hunting and pro conservation and not an environmentalist. And I appreciate that he nuances these things.
Yeah.
Because he talks about like the environmentalism is about how people are basically ruining nature and how we should just basically die and let nature take its course. But as conservationists, we actually look and appreciate and work within the ecosystem, which is what hunting actually was set up as a conservation effort, is to make sure that species don't get wiped out, or if there is a problem that they're, counting things. So anyway, I like his perspective, but he has a great quote that I'm going to share. I love this because I think it goes to Charlotte Mason's ideas and just classical ideas, right? So when you're exploring your place in nature, remember that your attitude is more important than your acreage. Believe me, I understand that your attitude can be hard to control at times. As parents, we get lazy and make mistakes. We get careless. We get exhausted. But being mindful about nature can help us with our own problems as parents as much as it can help our kids. Observing nature requires quiet contemplation. The practice of studying nature is calming. It focuses your thinking and gives you a break from the constant buzz of politics, work, social media, and everything else we wish would just go away now and then. And then I'm going to skip down just a minute. So when you allow yourself to become enthusiastic about the natural world around you, your enthusiasm will be infectious to your children. It won't all be a picnic. Your kids may roll their eyes at you, or worse, the whining and fighting during the 2-hour car ride to the lake may want you to bag up the whole trip. No matter, though, stick with it. I have faith that you will eventually find and reconnect the addictive qualities of nature, which is good, because engaging with nature isn't something that you can do just once or twice and then walk away. It needs to become a practice, a discipline. And he's actually a pretty good writer. So it's been nice to read. I'm about, I don't know, a couple of chapters in now, but I'm looking forward to reading it. So it's nothing, astounding, but it just solidifies a lot of the things that I already think. But I always appreciate someone who can articulate it in a way, and then they're realistic and encouraging. So
Sounds good.
Yeah.
How long is it? Is it a big book?
No, it's probably like, it says like 150 pages.
Okay.
Yeah, 160.
Okay.
Does it have nature pictures?
It does not.
Oh, okay.
There's nice little sketches with like a dad helping a kid learn how to shoot a gun. So, we're pro.
Did you frame it?
Yeah, probably.
That's
I mean,
great.
it's not like I don't have those at home anyway. So anyway, it's really nice, but it's the subtitle is Getting Your Family Out of the House and Radically Engaged with Nature. And he's one that like he uses all the parts of the animal, and he's not into like trophy hunting. He's more about, just connecting and using all the pieces. So I really like that.
Nice. It's great. Well, Jason, what about you? Do you have something you've been reading?
Yes, I do. I have this book called Range: Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World.
We
Are you
love
laughing?
that book.
I am so excited because that's
we love
actually,
this book.
Well, I haven't read it yet, Abby.
Oh, you haven't?
I haven't read
it's
it.
so good.
But my local Charlotte Mason book club, we do some like a one-off in the summer, and that is our summer book. So I'm excited to hear what you think of it because I'm going to be reading it soon.
Yeah, I really loved it so far. So it's by David Epstein. And part of why I love it is because I have really appreciated and read a lot of the kind of elite performance books out there. So if you haven't heard, over the last, 10, 20 years, there's been books kind of, I feel like Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers kind of started it with the 10,000 hours rule. Like if you want to be best in the world at something, right?
Eric Anderson and all of that.
And then there's like Talent is Overrated, The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle.
Yep.
And then like a lot of this relies on the research of Anders Ericsson, and he, with a co-author, came out with the book Peak. But I think there's really something to a lot of this literature about how, if you do this sort of high quality practice, deliberate practice, purposeful practice, whatever you want to call it, and accumulate that over time, that's how you get really excellent at something. And I think that even like allies with some things we see from Charlotte Mason about the power of attention and how like when you're narrating, I mean, you're kind of chugging those brain muscles in a way that you wouldn't otherwise, for instance. But I've always felt kind of uneasy with it at the same time, because it's like not all of life is just like you put your kids on this trajectory of they're going to be a world famous chess player like the Polgar family did, and you're just going to go for it. And so I thought it was really interesting how he kind of at least so far, I'm like halfway through, so I'm not done yet, but he's laid out this really unique and compelling case for how, for some sorts of things, that's not the way to go about it. This direct, like, I'm going to be a tiger parent and, force my kid onto this trajectory actually doesn't always work for getting elite performance in this or that area. Like, he uses I think an example of the greatest tennis player in recent history, Roger Federer's, is that,
that's correct.
Am I right there? Yeah.
Yep.
Like that he tried a whole bunch of other sports and only kind of settled on that to really pursue later into his youth, maybe even in college.
Late teens. Yep.
Yeah. And so, and then there are just a whole bunch of other examples like that for certain sorts of things, that type of practice with immediate feedback is just not possible. You can't do that, say, in teaching, for instance. Like there are domains where you actually need to be a generalist. You need to be stretched. You need to try all sorts of things. You actually get better not by just practicing the same thing, but you get better by being exposed to more. And so, yeah, it's just really resonating with me right now, partly because I'm also writing and kind of exploring on Aristotle's intellectual virtue of prudence, and how that's kind of different than artistry. So like if you're training a particular artistic skill, it might be that it's just a purposeful practice, kind of paradigm that you should chug and put the hours in to get really great as a craftsman in that skill. But if what you want is actually prudence, the ability to like make decisions and value things rightly in complex areas where you're not going to get an easy right or wrong answer, well, maybe you actually need range. And so that's what I'm reading right now, and I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, you make me excited to read it.
Oh, and you know what? Part of the best part is if you look at the very beginning of the book, they've got like praise for it. And Malcolm Gladwell, right, who wrote Outliers, gives this quote. He says, "For reasons I cannot explain, David Epstein manages to make me thoroughly enjoy the experience of being told that everything I thought about something was wrong." I loved range, which is great and very generous of Malcolm Gladwell, I think.
Oh, I love it.
It's a great book. I really like it. And it sounds like you and I have read a lot of the same books.
I was thinking that.
Jason, I was like, oh yeah, I've read that one. Oh yeah, I've read that one. I love this. So yeah, but those are my favorite kinds of books.
Wow. Small world. That's great. Yeah.
Oh, I'm very excited now. Like, I really think it's going to be good for my group too, because I think there's so much pressure for us to specialize and develop really specific things with our children. And so trying to, I don't know, like stand up for generalism and say it has value, it can be difficult to do, or even to have the language to communicate it to the naysayers who, I don't know, really want kids to be competitively swimming at age 7. So anyway, should be great. Okay. Well, mine is Redeeming the Six Arts, a Christian approach to Chinese classical education by Brent Pinkall, which I think just came out, a couple of months ago or something? I feel like it's not that old.
Yep. 22. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like November or December.
Yeah.
I just got it and I haven't read it yet. So I'm excited to hear what you're.
Oh my goodness. It's so
I've only
good.
read the charioteering part.
Well,
that makes sense from your hunting comments previously. That's right. I'm starting to get to know you guys now.
I'm pretty sure charioteering should be brought back.
And we do it.
So we did an interview with the author. And so I kind of jumped forward and read necessary chapters in order to really be able to talk with him about some things. But now I've gone back to the beginning and I am enjoying so much. The very beginning, it's like the first third or so, is basically an ancient history of the development of Chinese education. So it's divided by dynasties. And so I was working on this yesterday, and it just, it reminds me of conversations I've had with teachers when I'm training them, where we talk about just the idea that like, you might not be a classical educator officially or a Charlotte Mason educator officially, but it seems like all of the best educators kind of figure these things out intuitively through observation and experience. And so a lot of the practices end up being the same, even if you don't call them certain things or whatever. And I just feel like, oh, it's all over again. We're just good education just is what it is. And people throughout history have figured out how to teach and how people learn and what our big weaknesses are as humans. And anyway, so it's just fascinating to see it in the East, because so often I feel like we're told, and not that there's nothing special about the West. I think there is something special about the West, but it's taught as if there's some division where like the East didn't know this or something. That doesn't seem to be the case after reading this. It's just fascinating. So I was reading through this. What's the name of it? He has translations of something called the Record of Learning, which is, I don't know. I mean, it was written thousands of years ago, but it's translated into English in this book. And it's talking about, precepts of the academy. And it has these different, basically like rules a good teacher would follow, principles a good teacher would follow. And it's things like guard against bad habits before they become ingrained, readiness and timing, be flexible, have good humor with your students, adjust your structure and your sequence to suit the subject and the student, observe, discuss. And the failings that it talks about, it could have been written by Charlotte Mason. It could have been written by great medieval educators. It's just amazing to read it and see, oh, the truth is the truth. And people find it and write about it. And it's just so great. It even talks about knowing your students intimately. I appreciated this. It's only when teachers understand the temperaments of their students that they can save them from error. So it talks about how different temperaments fall into different types of error. So you have the kids that will focus too narrowly. So they'll specialize too much, to use the language you were just using, or the ones that will overextend themselves. So they're so kind of ADD and scattered. They're not really giving attention to anything. There are ones who will think things are too easy and make mistakes because they have made assumptions, or ones that will think it's too hard and they will give up. And about how we have to observe these things in our students because we can't counter it if we aren't aware of which side of the horse they're falling off of. It's just great. I'm so enjoying these excerpts from these ancient texts that, I know they're translated into modern English, and I'm sure that's part of why they're resonating, but it's just a beautiful thing. Truth is a beautiful thing. What can I say?
Right.
That it is.
Hello, Abby here to tell you about Sistership, the place for moms learning and growing. We embrace the call to shape culture by starting with our own education, our own library shelves, and thinking and planning how to spend our time. We need to be equipped for the great task of educating our children. Sistership is the place to talk about reading widely, a place to discuss and think deeply, and share how you are faithfully applying the ideas you encounter. Sistership is for all the women serious about education for themselves and for their families, but understand that in order to educate, we can't take ourselves too seriously. Join us in Sistership for the camaraderie and stay for the fun.
We're going to title this episode, I think we're going to title it Rewards Revisited, because we did talk about rewards, I don't know, a couple years ago or so when we did an episode with Karen Glass called Death by Sticker Chart. But I feel like it's time to talk about it all over again, because it's always good to have a fresh perspective. And you, Jason, you've read and you've written on this a lot. I've heard you talk about it on your podcast. I listen to your podcast a lot. So I feel like you've spent a lot of time thinking on this subject. And I feel like some fresh perspective on this is going to be great for our listeners, because we live in a world dominated by kind of the whole donkey following the carrot behavioralist mentality of you don't get anything done without manipulation techniques, basically. And so it's really hard to get away from it, because it's like we don't have an inventory of alternatives anymore. we don't even know what to do. Right.
And our world is not only, like it was in Charlotte Mason's day where marks and grades were getting more prominent, but it's like built into the fabric of our ecosystem now in a way that I don't think was ever the case in human history. Like the rise of modern psychology and behavioralism, and like how people have studied what we as human beings will respond to. I mean, just think about our phones and the like $6 trillion attention getting industry. Like we live in a world that has these manipulations down pat. And yeah, it's built into the educational landscape as well. And so, yeah, I completely agree with you that it's worth opening up again and again and again, because it's such a pervasive problem.
I think my first question for you is, do you think that all rewards are absolutely bad? There is this real extreme view within some in the Charlotte Mason community where it becomes like, we never give a reward at all. So do all rewards have a negative effect on character? I mean, I feel like that's the perspective all of us probably share, is that there's a potential for negative effect on character when we're using rewards. But do you think there's ever a place for them?
For me, when I think about that, my immediate impulse is to go to a Christian worldview and to think in terms of Proverbs, but also even the fact that Jesus offers us rewards. Of course, those rewards have a really long time horizon. And so, it's not exactly the same as when I ask my child to do something and then offer them candy for doing it, right? Like the nature of when you get the reward and what you're doing for what reward, I think those specifics all actually matter, because it's not just that rewards in and of themselves are wrong. For me, I like to use the term manipulation, or to think about what sorts of rewards are manipulative, because I feel like that resonates with us. We all don't want to be manipulative, and we want to make sure that we have something that's genuine. And I think that communicates some of what Charlotte Mason was getting at too, when she talked about the place for natural rewards and natural consequences. I do think that she has that in mind too, and explicitly says so, that, there are consequences that you'll have. So if you think about kind of rewards and punishments in the same kind of boat, you have the positive and you have the negative, you have the carrots and you have the sticks, then, we will get rewards for things in life. It's just part of it. It's part of the natural way the world is set up. The problem is when you use those in place of some natural desire, right? Like she talks about curiosity and the power of curiosity in human beings as an overwhelming power. Like the desire for knowledge is something that we as human beings naturally have. Even Aristotle says all men by nature desire to know at the beginning of the metaphysics. And so we really want to know things. And when you try and replace that natural desire or manipulate it with some other desire, that's where you get into trouble, because you're going to undercut that natural desire instead. So I do think that there is a place for rewards. I think there's a place for punishments. But I think that we do need to be careful about how we're using them and why and where.
So what would be, I'm trying to think, like, what's an example of a natural reward?
Well, if you finish your work early, now you have the natural reward of being able to choose what to do with your free time. If you instead choose, and this is, I think, an example right out of Charlotte Mason, and if instead you choose to dawdle over your work and, not finish making those C's or whatever, not finish your written narration or whatever it is, take a long time with it, you won't have as much free time. I think that's something that can be like laid into the nature of a home education scenario, just very naturally, right? Like there's a set amount of work. And so the reward or whatever it might be for that work is that once it's done, you now have the freedom.
So you are able to pull that off in a classroom?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do think one of the things we have, a lot of our teachers use this idea of wise time that we took from Matthew Whitling, who was a principal, I think, at Logos School a long time ago. The idea is it's actually almost necessary in a classroom because you constantly have students finishing things at different times.
That makes sense.
And so like you're going to have in a class of 15, some students who finish their math or whatever, the writing or, the drawing that they're working on earlier than others. And you don't want to just assign as homework to every other student who's not that quick to do that. And so it's absolutely essential to have like some sort of procedure in order where they can go and maybe pick out a book and do some reading from that, or have some other thing that they can work on during that time if they get done early. And so, Yeah, that's a great procedure that, especially in a kind of a lower school classroom, you just need to have. So
You brought up curiosity. It seems like what you're saying, so correct me if I'm wrong, is this idea that if we use especially the wrong kinds of rewards, then we actually, I think maybe use the word undercut the curiosity. I mean, are we saying that maybe that's what sorry, I'm like struggling with
No,
this.
you talked about like the natural desire to know, and we
Yeah.
interrupt that, right? We interfere with that natural desire to know when we manipulate them through rewards and punishments.
Where this question's coming from, I feel like this is a loaded question, but is my children sometimes complain that they meet other kids in the neighborhood and they feel like they have no curiosity. Is that where maybe this is coming from? The public schools are training kids out of their curiosity? Like, could we actually do that? Could we actually remove a lot of, not all of it? I mean, they're still humans, right? But are we actually able to kind of like deprogram the curiosity out of a child if we're not careful?
Oh, I think you are. And it's not only us on this side of the aisle that are saying that. There are, extreme progressives on the other side of the aisle that are criticizing modern education for how it's done precisely that, taking out the curiosity, just making it a system of hoops to jump through. And the thing is, too, when you make it mostly about whether you did the right thing or not, just give you an example of, say, in a younger grade classroom, how they use the, red light, yellow light, green light, sort of like, were you good today? Did you do what you were asked? Then you're on green, or then you're on yellow or red. You're training that child to just think about that and not the ideas. And so, I've heard even from as we do, parent interviews and stuff, like just stories about how your kid is focused entirely on that. They come home at the end of their school day and it's like, my name ended on green today, mommy. It's like, wow, is that really what you want your kid coming home sharing with you? That was their main goal to end on green. As noble as that is, there should be some level of obedience is important. You want to make sure that's there, but really they should be coming home talking about the bird that they learned about or looked at recess, or about the story from history that they read about. That's what you want them coming home sharing. The green light, red light, yellow light stuff just needs to get out of the way. Challenging behavior has to be addressed, and you have to have order in a class, and you have to have the right type of order and structure in a home education scenario, I would imagine too. But really what you want the educational project to be about is education, not just managing behavior. And so that's where it's really important there. I would say too, there's an interesting study cited in Dan Pink's book, Drive. I think it's the subtitle is Scientific Secrets of Motivation or something like that, which is a great book, by the way. I'd recommend Dan Pink's. Yeah. It's kind of a, bestseller from some years back now, but the book Drive, he talks about how in this study they did, if you had students who were learning an instrument, say, they would practice so much, say, in a week, and they did an experiment where the parents then offered to pay the child to keep practicing, to practice enough. And what they saw is that actually, instead of what you would think happening, the students be more consistent about their practice regimen, they actually got less consistent. They were less motivated to practice. And so you might think to yourself, well, why would that be? I mean, what child at that middle grades age wouldn't want some extra cash on the side? Well, it's because there's an implicit set of messages that you send when you do that. When you put that sort of unnatural reward and attach it to practicing an instrument that potentially the student enjoyed before. They might have enjoyed the hard work of practicing and the idea of getting better at playing the piano or guitar, whatever it is. And you say, when you say, I will give you money for this, what you end up saying to the child implicitly, and they just read it is that you don't actually want to do this. I have to trick you into doing it by giving you a reward. And so that's the thing for things that require intrinsic motivation or have intrinsic motivation naturally. And curiosity, as I mentioned before, is a great example of this, but like learning an instrument is another great example of this. When you give a reward to that, you end up cheapening it and saying to the student or child implicitly, you don't really want this good thing that has its reward in itself. I have to trick you into doing it by giving you money, as the case may be, or putting your name on green.
That's interesting. So you're saying we devalue the thing using rewards.
Yeah, there's a long history of this kind of insight. I mean, Charlotte Mason's saying the same thing, but there's this amazing passage in John Locke's, the kind of British philosopher's work on education, where he talks about how you absolutely should not offer rewards to your student, your child, for studying up his book. Like if you offer him, and I think he uses the example of sugar plums or, something else like that, you're just cockering up his love of pleasure. You're basically telling him, it's okay, you just really like candy. And so I'm going to give you candy in order to get you to do something that I know you don't like to do. I know you couldn't do it. You wouldn't do it otherwise. I'm going to just give you candy. You actually make them into little like consumerists and people who are focused on pleasure. And actually, John Locke says in doing that, you undercut the virtue of your child, which is like one of the worst things you can do. Right. So it's pretty serious, I think, in a lot of these people's language, what we do when we use rewards poorly.
Okay. So on that note, then, can intrinsic motivation be taught, or is it inherent? And if it can be taught, then how do we foster that intrinsic motivation? Like how do we go about that? That's not manipulative.
Yeah, it's such a good question, but because of that, hard. Part of I think what prompts this discussion is the idea of like marketing manipulations. Like we get manipulated by advertisements all the time into doing or buying things, because there's a sale or this or that or the other thing. And the thing about like those sorts of things is that they work. And this is what's true about rewards initially, is that they work to get a child to do it. And so like the kind of fear that we all feel is, well, if I pull it out, they might not actually do that. And so I do think that there is a difference here between unnatural rewards and natural consequences. And so sometimes, you may have a student who's struggling with motivation, just really does not like history or really doesn't like that literature work or has problems chugging through those math problems. And so the intrinsic motivation is not there. And so like, how do you get that to be there? Well, I think there are maybe 2 or 3 initial steps. One is you can't really just let them get out of it. If it's really part of their duty to do, Charlotte Mason would say, Locke would say, we live in a world of obligation and you have duty. Like there are things you ought to do, whether or not you feel like it. So it's okay and good for us as human beings to learn that lesson. Yeah. Our children do need to be able to persevere even when, hand and head are tired. Yeah. You got to be able to push through some things that you don't like. So like stepping back for a moment, in the big picture of my child's development, it's really okay for them to have trouble with intrinsic motivation for some things that I would like for them not to. In fact, it's inevitable. We all feel that like as adults, it's not going to go away. In a fallen world, there will be things that you should have intrinsic motivation for that you don't right now. Yeah. And you got to push through. So that first kind of level is don't just pull it away and let them get off hook. If it's a real duty. Now, if it's something that's on the side, like, like piano or dancing or whatever it might be. Like there are things that are not required, and so you should legitimately consider, is this a push through time where I should have my child stick to it? Or is this maybe this is a pull out time? And actually, we talked about range earlier. I'm right in the middle of his chapter where he's talking about the problem with too much grit. And, you might be aware of Angela Duckworth's book on grit and how we want gritty children who stick to it. And that's really good sometimes, but there are exceptions. It's like you don't want to push your child to grind their teeth and, just grit through everything. You have to quit some things. And so,
good point.
Yeah.
So that's one. There's a right place for pushing through. If it's a real duty, you got to keep doing it. But then how can you lay the groundwork for a better relationship with that subject or area? How can you inspire that intrinsic motivation? And here, I do think that we want to come alongside them and lead them into the joys of something. And you want to be gentle. You want to coax. You want to give the big picture why this area is important, and just keep sowing those seeds of inspiration and passion. You can put as much as possible. Like, so sometimes this type of thing, intrinsic motivation, right? It's going to be caught rather than just taught. You can just tell them this is a valuable thing. Like, you got to live it out and hopefully model it for them. And to the extent that you could do that over time and be patient. Thirdly, check in on the challenge level. Because if something's just too challenging for them, that's really going to make it hard for them to kind of get in the flow and enjoy it. And so that's another way to develop intrinsic motivation. It's like, let's give him some softballs here in this area, whatever it is, and then coax him in and give him a high inspiration and some passion and some joy associated with it. Because we're really trying to enculturate them into the value of something.
Okay, going back to don't let them off the hook. My family, actually, we kind of have a rule, and I've picked it up from a couple different books, but it's just like you can't quit on a bad day, because sometimes, yes, I think you're right. I think there are the kids who are going to grind it out, but most of the time when my kids have come home from, they're upset, they're frustrated with themselves or something that happened during a practice or during a time, and we just want to quit, right? And I think that you're right on the duty part, the things that we ought to do. And I do think the better relationships, like I do have a firm belief that you can't love something unless you actually know it. And how do you know something? Well, you spend time with that subject or with that person, right? And that's how you grow in love. And the reason, and we're so bad at things when we start.
Right.
So it's easy to say, I just don't like that. I'm not good at it. You don't love it because you're not good at it. But just because you're not good at it doesn't mean you can't grow to love it and then become better. And then checking the challenge level is really good. Backing it off and meeting them at the level that they're at so that they do have some natural wins, I think can be incredibly motivating.
So how should a parent approach the situation where they have a child? Let's just use piano. I hear this with piano all the time. They really think that piano is valuable for their child as a beginning musical instrument, as learning to read music. Like they see the piano as not necessarily an end in itself. They're not trying to have a virtuoso, but just as this tool for introducing the whole world of music to their child. Yet this child does not want to practice. And I'm wondering if the parents decide this is something we're not going to quit yet. We may quit it someday, but we're not going to quit yet. But they also are trying not to use rewards. Do you have any advice for the motivation component? I mean, is this like just a grit situation, or is there something else that they can do to try to help their child want to practice?
Yeah, I think there are. I think part of that also may come to the teacher, because I think a really great teacher in that situation is able to like lead a child in. So it might be that actually trying a different teacher or trying a different method would help bring that student in. And so like, just to kind of dwell in the example of piano, and I don't know a ton about this, but my wife was a voice teacher. Like, you really do want to, in early stages for some type of like artistry, like what we're talking about now, you kind of want to ease the student in and really kind of hook them in the early stages of a craft. And so it may be that there is actually just too much of a focus on the grind at this point and not enough on the glory of the craft itself. So like, are we watching or listening to or engaging with some virtuosos? Are we hearing and watching someone who's really skilled? Because if you want to inculcate a natural desire in someone to develop the artistry in somewhere, they got to see the end products of an art. And when you see the end products of the art, as a human being, you naturally kind of want to imitate it and to develop that skill because you see how valuable it is. And so I would say that that's maybe one thing. It's like, when you think about those who get really into a sport, right? They're watching the sport on the TV. Like they know the names of the great soccer players, say. And that's actually a natural part of developing that kind of passion or drive to pursue a particular area. So I would kind of dial it back and like find some of those ways to engage with it if possible. And then, there's the other question of like, well, do you just want this for discipline training? Well, okay. I mean, it's going to do that. It's kind of like the same thing when some people talk about like the value of studying Latin. It's like, oh, it's going to discipline your mind, and then, sometimes though, when you train a student like this is merely for discipline, you end up like, they end up hating it when they go out afterwards, right? But when you train them for the joy of the thing, you might actually get them to be much more disciplined. And so there's this kind of unique paradox to especially practice that you really want students to be able to get really into it and have the drive to go for it and to enjoy it to a certain extent, even as it's hard and challenging. Otherwise, I'm not sure that they really learned discipline even. And so you have to put those two things together, I think, in the right way to get at that motivation.
Okay, then answer me this. How is this different from like a child-centered education? I mean, I get like you're trying to woo them in a sense to do this. Like, how is that not kind of a form of child-centered manipulation?
Maybe I'll need to clarify, but let me start off with where I'm going here, I guess, is that part of what we're talking about right now is specifically how you train a student in an art.
Okay.
And the motivation to push through with practice, because arts require practice to develop, to mastery. And so in that realm in particular, I wouldn't say any art is really child-centered, because it has to be about some standard of excellence that we can all look to and say, that's actually really excellent. I'm going to go on a path to getting to that excellence. And any art that you turned into a child-centric thing would be absurd. And of course, there are some child-centered modern schools that are like, they take little kids and have them, here, just draw whatever you feel. It's going to be great. It's like, well, that actually did not teach them drawing at all. Like that, I'm sorry.
Yep.
That maybe was nice. Obviously there's a place at early age stages where like they should just free draw because they're developing just fluency with the tools. Yeah. But like at a certain point, you're going to get to the point where they're not going to progress in drawing ability at all unless you give them some training in it, some real like practice, and you have real jobs for them to do. And so I guess that's what I would say is that in that category, right, training in an art isn't child-centered. But training in arts isn't everything either. And so I do think that artistry and that sort of thing is one thing. There is the whole other side of like just general knowledge and like love of all the areas of knowledge. which like Charlotte Mason is really great at emphasizing too. And so I think that also is a place where like, right, knowledge for its own sake is wonderful there. You'll pick up knowledge as you're doing arts as well, but you should also live in the world of books and not just be doing piano practice all day. Unless, you really are going to be the next generation's virtuoso. There's potentially a legitimate place for that in some families. That would be dependent on your family culture, though, too. Very often, those who can actually do and sustain that sort of thing, the parents are super excellent at something already. Mm-hmm. So does that make sense? At least to your initial point, I don't think artistry training almost can ever be child-centered. Like, we'll be child-centered at school, but then even the modern parent will take their kid, the modern suburbanite will take their kid to lessons, and you're like, okay, is she getting better? I want to make sure. What can she work on, right? So yeah. I think we still understand excellence a little bit, even in our child-centered posturing.
That's actually a fascinating comparison to think about the difference between being child-centered and having a standard of excellence. Yes. I never juxtaposed those two before. That's interesting.
I like it.
Do you?
Yeah, I like
it. Good. We're glad to have your approval.
That's why I asked it. No. Good job, Jason. Good answer. Okay. So if you are, feeling woefully underdeveloped in your own intrinsic motivation towards maybe even just studying something hard or difficult. I know a lot of people, oftentimes just are like, well, in health related things, but let's talk about the intellectual life, right? I have too many things in my life. I have laundry and dishes and cooking because I have 5 teenagers in my house. All I do is cook. So like, what is the intrinsic motivation for your mom who is educating her children and knows it's important, but just finds that at the end of the day, she's too tired, or finds that, she can't get up in the morning because her baby didn't sleep at night? Like, these are the things that, our audience, is dealing with.
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I'm almost under I feel like it's a hard question for someone like me in my spot to answer,
like
because I'm kind of like thinking that's what I was going to say. What would my wife think of my answer here? So
that's kind of like a great question.
So what about your wife? Yeah.
Case, I think that we all have a life of the mind, and the mind feeds on ideas. So I'm just going to go Charlotte Mason on you, and you guys can, take that.
Do it.
Run with it. Is that like, I think you got to, as a mom, especially if you got a bunch of little kids and you're trying to like organize a whole home education paradigm for them, and just all the work and order and organizing that's involved in that, I think you got to remember that you are a spiritual being and you're not just a workhorse. And so you need to carve out time for your own intellectual delight and growth and enjoyment. And so, at times that's going to be like, oh, yes, let's do a stretch book. Like, let's read something that's going to challenge me. Like whatever that's for you, that's on, the Scholé Sisters list, like, okay, norms and nobility, I'm going to do it this year, or whatever it might be, right? But you should also, dive into other things that are going to be delightful for you and are just going to draw you along. And so I think I remember reading in kind of one of the initial biographies of Charlotte Mason, a letter that she wrote to a lot of her former students who were off being governesses or something like that, encouraging them just about the incredible importance of feeding on ideas for themselves. And I would say that the maybe like 1.0 version of this is just whatever you're teaching your kids, whatever you're leading them through, do what you can to sit in that material for a little bit, and don't just like read it to check off the box. Like, give yourself 2 more minutes to like sit with something. Go like, hey, what is the spark here? What's the living idea that's going on? I think lesson planning is work. Like, I work with teachers all the time and train them in that sort of, method of how to plan a lesson. And you can find a resource for that on Educational Renaissance website if you want. But I would just say, even if you as a home educator are trying to get through the material and make sure you're prepped to try and guide your kids through it, the reason you do that partly is because you also are going to feed. You are learning alongside them. And so you will actually teach them better if you have this openness and pause. And I mean, I haven't read the book Teaching from Rest, but I feel like I'm just like talking. And you guys' name is Scholé, right?
Yeah,
so,
that
what you guys talk
receptivity.
about already. Like, I mean, I'm probably saying all the things you guys already say, but that's what comes to mind as an answer, that like, hey, live in the books you're with your kids and enjoy them.
How did you learn? I mean, have you just always been a pretty motivated person? Because I've watched your work a little bit. So I see that you're writing books and you're doing this podcast and then you're at this school and you seem to always be learning, growing, motivated kind of person. Were you publicly educated? Did you have to kind of counteract your own? Did you come to this table with baggage or is this just kind of who you are?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a yes and no. I grew up and I did love reading, and I would say that I was generally curious all through education. Like, I was at a public school. My parents moved me up a grade, which was rough because my brother was in 2nd grade when I was moved up from 1st into 2nd. So like,
wow.
Rough for him, Like, we had people at our big public school that would go, "Are you the smart one?" to one of us. We looked at us for a while, like,
oh no.
And I was like, "Oh man, really?" But I never like, gave him a hard time or anything for that. So we're good friends today. But I would say I was generally interested, as a student, was a good kid. I got a fairly good education and did love learning and, was interested in ideas, I think, for their own sake early on. So I think that certainly helped. I think life is busy, and, if you have some sense of what you're here to do and what you're called to do, you're going to work at it. I would say I started out after college working at a small classical Christian school. It was like 3 years old, just nearby Wheaton College, where I had done my undergrad and then did my graduate degree. And while I was teaching and administrating officially like full time, I did a master's degree right across the street at Wheaton College, full time in biblical exegesis. And man, that was when I learned to work.
Wow.
I was waking up at, early in the morning on Saturdays and just like hitting the books. And I would go back and forth from teaching Latin at the school to, take a Hebrew exegesis course and then walk back and teach more Latin. And then that evening have a 6:30 to 9:30 p.m. class, and then do Shakespeare play rehearsal for the middle school as I was directing the Shakespeare play.
Word.
So I've always been probably overcommitted. So,
maybe we should commit. No, it's great. It's great. That's great.
That is great.
But it's hard, man. I'm a principal now, and our school's grown more than double its size in the last 2 years.
Oh,
here.
Wow.
And we've moved a building, and just like the amount of things an administrator at a small classical Christian school has to do and deal with and master is just crazy. So people ask me how I try to keep up writing the books. It's just like, you know what? I have a blog article due tomorrow morning. So it's going to get finished and sent out tomorrow morning, whether it's perfect or not. So I think it's partly just being an imperfectionist. Otherwise you don't get anything done. You just have to be willing to ship something out, whether or not it's perfect. So
I kind of want to circle back to the idea of like the damaged student. So I mean, you're at a school, I'm sure you get transfer students that are coming in from maybe schools that used a ton of rewards and then eroded that intrinsic motivation because of that. We have moms that are listening who that's the story of their own children, either because they brought them home from a public school or because they themselves were seeped in rewards are the way that you motivate your children. So that was then the relationship they set up with their children. Now they're learning all of this stuff and they feel trapped because they don't know how to undo the damage. So I'm wondering, kind of as like a last, like, can you give hope to someone who feels like their child has been entrenched in this reward heavy approach?
Or maybe lost their curiosity?
Or yeah, like, are there some steps that we can take to transition children to this? Really, it's a better life, right? This better life of curiosity, natural rewards, relating better with authority because you're not being manipulated by them. I mean, how do we help that child?
Yeah, I think there is. I've seen a lot of students transition over the years into a classical Christian school that used Charlotte Mason's philosophy and has them narrating from beautiful, rich texts. And it just like lights up their eyes. I've heard stories from parents just like, my kid loves learning now. It's amazing. Like they're so excited. And so I think that it's very possible. I think the culture does something. So there's any way you can put them in or with kids who are loving and delighting in something that's helpful, because part of this is that it is actually spread culturally. It's like a social thing. So what we love and value and get excited about is often tuned off of one another. And particularly our peers too are going to play a good role in that. Like whoever we think is our tribe, we're going to almost learn from them what's valuable, what's exciting, what's important, what's fun, which is one of the reasons why you should really think carefully before sending your kid to a public school, amongst others. And so I think if I try and translate that in my own mind to like a family situation, home culture and home education, I do think just taking the reins off of grades for a minute, just let's not grade and give feedback on every little thing. Like let's get in there and let's appreciate it. I think having the practice of narration being developed for a student and putting some just rich, delightful books, and don't start for that sort of student with the books that are going to just really crazy challenge them. Like it's not the time to go there, right? It's just put something that's easy to reach, but still like beautiful and interesting and things, and you want to draw on what they know and are interested in already. So like do a special subject that's like their favorite genre of books, whatever it is, and do that as part of your early kind of homeschooling transition or whatever you're doing with that for them, because you really want them to learn and get this natural hunger growing and developing for knowledge. And so it's okay to start in that sense a little bit easy, but then, right, have them narrate it and you just like pushed the challenge feature up there, but it also gave them the chance to digest and delight in it. And that's going to bring it out in them too. So those are some things I would say, like, think about the value of culture, what you love, what the siblings love, like the family experiences. How can you help them associate this educational task that you're doing positively? Like, okay, maybe we're going to, cuddle up on the couch with hot chocolate in order to read our literature book, and you do that and they love it, right? So like find some of those cultural ways, but then also make sure it's not too hard and have the subjects or genres that they already like to draw out alongside the others. And make sure you're using narration and giving them the chance to tell it back fully, because that's going to start to open up that natural curiosity for them too, where they really start feeding and then developing an appetite. And pretty soon you'll see over a course of months that they've got a hefty appetite now and will start going on their own even more.
I love that. That was super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome. It's so great to be with you all. Thanks for the privilege of being
Thank
invited
you,
to
Jason.
share and talk with you all on your wonderful conversation here.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Have a great evening.
Yes.
And we appreciate it so much.
Yeah, you too. Great to engage with you both. Take care.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the sisterhood of the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with a friend and then discuss it with her. This is a great way to continue the conversation. All of the books and things we mentioned today are linked in our show notes. Just go to scholésisters.com/SS119 to check it out. Don't forget to sign up for the Scholé Sistership and join the 5x5 Reading Challenge support group. The 5x5 Reading Challenge really helps you read widely, which is the first step in self-education. Just go to scholésisters.com/join and become a Sophie member. In our next episode, Misty and I are having a very interesting chat with her pastor, Toby Sumter, about raising boys, specifically centering on what it looks like to raise boys to leave the home. You're going to be very interested in what he has to say. Until then, we want to remind you once again that homeschooling is a marathon. You needn't run alone, so open up your eyes and look around you. Find your sisters.
I actually appreciate a name to the face for purposes of I'm very relational. The other ones, maybe not. Just
okay,
kidding, Brandy.
rude.
No.
They're not.
Abby's children need you to offer them a reward so that they will behave themselves.
There we go. All right.
We're following the outline, Brandy.
Oh, do we still do that?
Yeah, we do.